the damage is created by the United States of America. That's absolutely clear. So if you don't retaliate, you don't exist. Do you exist? Do you have an existence by your own? Or do you let the US do whatever they want?
Now, let's pick up what's been the big story of the last couple of weeks, those tariffs introduced and to a certain extent then suspended by Donald Trump. Most of America's trading partners, bar China, have had a reprieve for 90 days after Donald Trump announced a pause. In return, the EU paused its retaliatory action. Well, joining us now is Jean-Claude Trichet. Hello to you.
Hello.
Where do you think this is going? Are we, in 90 days' time, we're going to be back where we were earlier this week with tariffs, big tariffs imposed by Donald Trump and big counter tariffs from the EU?
Well, first of all, I think that even if there is a pause, the scars of what has been decided and posed before are still there. And in any case, you still have the 10% tariffs. So I am not optimistic on the capacity of the, I would say, global economy and the European economy as well as the US to stabilize, really. I'm expecting still a lot of ups and downs, a lot of difficulty, major difficulty, because it's rather extraordinary that an executive branch would embark in such decisions that were obviously from the very start, first of all, very contrary to growth. So it was something against, I would say, growth in the US and in the rest of the world. It was something which was highly inflationary. And again, it came at a moment where the central banks had done a good job to stabilize price. And we had on both sides of the Atlantic, in the UK, in Europe, in the US, quite a good job done. And that job was put into question by a general increase of tariffs, which of course would have immediate consequences in terms of inflation. And on top of that, you had the idea that the dollar was to, would say, devalue its own the currency of the US resolutely. So you had some advisors of the president, including Monsieur Miron and Monsieur Navarro, and a lot of them, and they were calling both, I would say, for the dollar to go down and for the tariffs to go up. Not surprisingly, it triggered a big problem in the stock market, a big problem in the bond market, and a big problem for the dollar. So it was a perfect storm, if I may, created by the United States themselves. So we will see where we go from now on, but as I already said, I'm not very optimistic.
Now, I appreciate what you're saying about the uncertainty whipped up by the White House, but just suppose that Donald Trump has been chastened a little bit by what happened on the markets and that we stay where we are with the 10% across the board tariff pretty much for every exporter to the United States and maybe those bigger tariffs on the steel, iron and cars. In your view, should the European Union retaliate on those, reciprocate with tariffs in a general tariff and then specific tariffs on higher tariff products?
First of all, certainly on those tariffs that have not been posed and are, in my opinion, abnormal. So I would certainly call the European to respond to this attack because it's a trade attack and totally out, of course, of normal behavior in the present, at least in the way the global economy was managed before. As regard the 10%, I think it calls for some meditation, if I may. You don't have only the 10%, you have also this idea that the VAT is something which is against the US, which is totally wrong. And it seems to me that we are far from having stabilized the relationship on that front. That being said, of course, after the pause, I think it was right for the European to say, well, let's engage in negotiation, in discussion, and we will see where we go from there. But again, I insist, I stress the fact that from the overall functioning of the global economy standpoint, the scars of what has been doing are there. And particularly, I have to say, in the US, the fact that some major observers, including major CEOs in major institutions, are mentioning the fact that they are more or less expect a kerfuffle in the US Treasury market is very alarming, obviously.
Because the problem is, if you retaliate by putting tariffs on in the EU or indeed in the UK, you are punishing your own consumers, aren't you?
Well, I mean, the damage is created by the United States of America. That's absolutely clear. So if you don't retaliate, you don't exist. Do you exist? Do you have an existence by your own? Or do you let the US do whatever they want? Of course, they are punishing themselves. And of course, we should minimize, of course, the self-punishment that in which we could embark. But to the extent that the strategy or tactics, I don't know how to qualify, of the United States is so bizarre and based upon the, I would say, strong aggression against, I would say, friends as well as enemies, which is totally bizarre. I mean, it's strange. Well, you know, there is not only the behavior as regards trade and tariffs. Look at Ukraine. How can the United States behave as they do? I mean, treating one enemy much better than friends. I mean, we have in a strange world, and we have to say what is exactly the situation. We should not be too much prudent and cautious. There is something very abnormal in the making.
But, I mean, there are those who say, yes, this is abnormal. Yes, the United States is behaving in an extraordinary way. So the best thing in trade is to ignore it and have a free trade area with the rest of the world.
Well, I am for a free trade area with the United States and certainly with Europe and the UK. That would be very, very good. It had been recommended, if I'm not mistaken, by Elon Musk. You know, one of the advisors of the president is himself saying, let's embark on a transatlantic free trade. And of course, as you said, also with a large part of the rest of the world. I'm personally for free trade with Latin America and certainly for free trade also with a large part of Asia. So I agree with you on that. And again, it is also the sentiment of advisors of the president of the US itself. So let's see where we go from here. But again, let's not display weakness. The entity which is in front of us says very, very clearly, I don't like the weaks, and I will combat the weaks, and I will win against the weaks. So we are not weak. We are, at least as regards the continental European, the first market of the world, higher than the US in terms of, I would say, overall size of our market, of our consumer market. And the UK is a very, very important importer too, of course. And we should not be weak. That's my own understanding. And we have the chance in the European Union that we are in a federal position from that standpoint, because the trade negotiations are done exactly as is the currency, the euro. It is done on the basis of a federation.
Okay, Jean-Claude Trichet, former president of the European Central Bank, thank you for that.